Alright, so once you want to remove your alternator, first thing you're going to need to do is remove the belt and disconnect the battery. Disconnect the negative first and the positive, and you can click the link on the left. We have videos for both of those procedures, which would be battery removal and serpentine belt replacement. So then once you have those out, then we can disconnect our electrical. There's going to be a 10mm nut right there, and you can just use a little 1/4-inch ratchet with a 10mm socket and take that nut off so you can disconnect the main cable from the alternator. And just set that nut aside. And then there's a little tab you can see down here that locks this to a bracket, support bracket. Then you can just put that aside. And then there's another connector right here that the AC hose is kind of in the way, but you can work around it. There we go. So you gotta squeeze the tab right here to unlock it and then pull it back. And then to be safe, I also disconnected the AC down below, which you also squeeze the tab here and then just pull up on it, because when we pull the alternator back, I don't want to yank on that wire. And then there's gonna be one more connector down below on the thermostat housing. It's for the ECT, the engine coolant temperature sensor. But that one, probably gonna have to pull the alternator back to get to it because it's hidden behind it. So next what we want to do is there's a 12mm head bolt here on top, and there's a 14mm bolt down below that are mounting the alternator in place. So we're going to loosen those next. Alright, so before we take out the alternator, there is this wiring harness that's clipped into it. Removing this connector from that alternator is probably going to require breaking it, but you can actually disconnect the zip tie part that wraps around by putting in a little pocket screwdriver and wiggling it in there and pulling out the strap, and then that way you can have your wire harness free, and then we'll be able to pull the alternator out, get it out of the way, and then that'll actually give us access to the thermostat housing, and we won't be pulling on any wiring and risking damaging it. So then to dismount the alternator, there's a 14mm bolt down below. There it is. So I'm just going to use the 3/8 ratchet, break that loose. Alright, there's our bolt. And then on top, 12mm bolt, and let's see, there we go. Alright, so now just pull that alternator back. Okay, so we're going to put our alternator back in. And sometimes you might find yourself having a bit of trouble wiggling it into place down on the base where the lower part mounts. And what happens is this nut right here, which is held from spinning by this little tab, this nut, when it gets tightened down, gets pulled in, and it makes it so this space is very tight around that mount down below. And it can be really frustrating wiggling it into place so that you can get the bolt to go through and line up. So a weird trick that I found works for me is actually taking a big C-clamp and a big socket. This is a 27mm socket. Fits right over the tab and the nut. And then I slide the C-clamp into place and then tighten it down, and you want to get it all squared up real good so you apply even pressure to the nut. And so what's happening is this part of the C-clamp is pushing the nut back. So, and you just crank on it. You probably don't have to crank on it much. Just, it might be difficult, but maybe even just a half a turn is enough. And then loosen it. Take that out, and your nut here will be pushed back just a little bit. You can kind of see the rusted area, and there's like a shiny area starting to be exposed in there, but it's now pushed back just a touch, which will be plenty for us to easily slide it into place. Alright, so now we're reinstalling our alternator. Gonna set it into place here. Probably easy to just start with the upper bolt. Alright. And then, see, now we got plenty of wiggle room to get our bottom bolt in place. There we go. Goes through easily. So there's no adjustment on this alternator. The tensioner takes care of the adjustment for with the serpentine belt. So all you gotta do is tighten these bolts down. So you might need to crank on this lower one good so you can get that nut to seat into place. There we go. And now we can hook up the rest of our connections. Got our plug in the back. And then we got our plug down below for the air conditioning. And there's this support clip that can hook back in. And then don't forget your alternator wire here. Your 10mm nut. Make sure you hook that up before you go and hook the battery back up. Make sure you have it lined up with the prongs properly. You don't want to damage anything. And put the boot back over. That'll hook on to the lip right there. And then there's your support bracket and the plastic clip for the alternator cable. There we go. So then next step we'll go and hook up our serpentine belt. Oh, and we'll put a link for you there in the corner so you can check the video on how to do that if you don't already know how. And then after that, reconnect your battery. Generally it's a good idea to do positive first, then negative, which is a reverse of the removal. And that's about it for your alternator.